What I'm going to present today and what I offered to the Parliament and as I proposed my talk is to give meme paradigms, some very short phrases that can reframe the conversation and be as inclusive as possible for humanity. And so this comes from my upbringing in Christianity, and I was in Wisconsin in the 50s. I was in one of those Northern Ireland communities that was Catholic and Protestant, and I was the Protestant. Obviously, our societies have made great advances in terms of understanding, and I think that's something that we can celebrate. So, to give the pieces here, cooperation industry Earth, which I'll define, and the paradigm think local, planet, act regionally. The slides here show our greater neighborhood. There's Earth. Tip O'Neill's quotation is all politics is local. So mine is think local, planet, act regionally. So if we flip, if we make the planet local, then everything's local. I think we can actually do this. So I'm going to talk about community motive, which is turned out to be an uncommon term. I had to find it. And the profit motive that we're all familiar with, that's supposed to give us everything but is failing so miserably. And then the goal of greater community spirituality, that's the spiritual teaching that I've been following that is very inclusive of all the religions as reflections of inspiration by God for humanity. So what I want to begin with are the theses of community and cooperation. Simply, I worked as a regional planner in Virginia, and my job was to get local governments to cooperate. And most people, when I say that, kind of frown and say, can you do that? A businessman once asked me, do you have any customers? Well, we'll get into why it's difficult. We'll explain that and also come out with an interesting journey here where you will understand where my job was to sell cooperation. What I learned over time and what became my thesis is that community precedes cooperation. So if there's something that you want to do, you will go out and build community. You will find the people for your interfaith council. You will build community because if we have community, then you have cooperation. Now, the second thesis is that community is how life solves all problems. And problems do get solved, but there's sort of an ending supply of new problems. The third thesis is that security is the primary purpose of community. We don't survive as individuals. When we were tribes on the plains of Africa or the Americas or wherever, we survived not as individuals but as groups. And these three theses, which I had developed at one point, I later, in my development, put them together as community motive because I presumed that something like a community motive had to exist. And I did search and find it. And then if we add it to the profit motive, we get cooperation industry Earth. And that's going to cover all of the things. Now, I offer the proof of the thesis here in this simple photograph that I saw and published for my news feed is a pile of fire ants who have formed their own ark. They're sticking together to survive the South Carolina flooding. So that is just initial proof. They solved their problem this way. And we're doing the same thing. We've done it. We're only in this room here because we've been able to solve the problems of community. So, again, the notion of cooperation industry Earth is that it's inclusive of all humans and all their activity. But it doesn't have a classification code. So if you were an economist or a business person and somebody asked, what's your standard industrialization code, SIC? No codes. It networks worldwide, recognizing the importance of boundaries for community self-management and organization. regional, and greater communities. And for those people in our cooperation industry who only cooperate for the domination of others using war and conquest, well, they're just catalysts for greater peace. So the list of all these organizations that are getting tired of it are coming together, necessity is being created. So this requires a greater community spirituality and a perspective, which is the interfaith approach of the Parliament. The Big Tent isn't big enough. We made the tent as big as the whole planet. As humans, we respond to necessity, and that will take us to the needed age of human unity and cooperation, and that is the vision of peace. And I would call that the miracle of the commons. You know, we're always hearing about the tragedy. The miracle is people see a problem, they organize, and they stop it. So my perspective for 35 years in Virginia, regional planner, we had 5 counties, 14 towns in the city, and in 1973, they were afraid there was a plot to consolidate them out of business. So they feared the term regionalism. But over time, they gained comfort talking to each other. There were some programs, some incentives to do things. Things needed to be done, and they got done. So our region actually worked. And when I tried to explain that to my peers throughout the country, and I had to analyze it, I concluded that we had become a regional community. So, again, my spiritual path as a Christian, which looked at as many religions as I could, starting as a teenager, which I'm sure most of you have done yourselves. So I encountered greater community spirituality in 1997, which contributed a lot of practical ideas. So, first of all, we had to learn how to see the whole world. It's said, and this may be true, that we knew we were a sphere, although that's what science told us. But it's said that we didn't believe it until we saw the pictures from space. So Stuart Brand had to lobby NASA to get that published. And it was at this time that the notion of think globally, act locally came out. So I graduated from college in 1968, University of Wisconsin, and these are the books that I read in that period: Whole Earth Catalog, War and Peace in the Global Village by Marshall McLuhan. Buckminster Fuller published the operating manual for Spaceship Earth, which is a free PDF you can get online. Today it might be Space Nation Earth, might actually be where we're headed. Future Shock by Alvin Toffler. I learned that planning existed, and that pushed me in the direction of planning. And, of course, one is to grow. So we've been at this a long time, thinking globally, and there's still more work. And we know our whole Earth is divided politically into nations. So the political systems, political jurisdictions are systems of regions, and these boundaries stack up on one another, and boundaries reflect limits and have consequences. So the rules change when you cross the political boundaries. Even in your own country, you go from the city to the county or the different state. Building codes change, the zoning ordinance changes. You know, things change a little bit. But the ease of crossing boundaries, so in the United States, generally, United States, Canada, we move throughout the country and we really don't have to pay any attention to the boundaries. Again, speed limits, some things change, but the boundaries are almost invisible. They have to put signs that say you're entering Salt Lake City, you're entering Utah. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. That's happened in Europe. I had the chance to go to Prague, and a friend of mine from Berlin drove us, and we went through the checkpoint that had been where the Iron Curtain was. Nothing there. And there wasn't even man. As we build trust, the boundaries become crossable. But the individual jurisdictions that are bounded, that's an intentional community. So boundaries, people don't like boundaries, but boundaries are very important for security. Here's ninth grade science, wherever you get the osmosis experiment. The membrane lets the good things pass through and keeps the bad things out. So boundaries are important. In 1985, when I was at the World Future Society, one presentation by Edith Wiener, a futurist. She said, we need boundaries so we know where responsibilities are. And then at another session, I hear Jessica Lipnack say, to solve problems, you have to cross boundaries. So we've got two truths. Okay, let's use them. Sometime, we have to use what's appropriate. So we saw the nation's map, and within every nation, usually there are states or provinces, and then there are counties, and then counties and cities and towns. So there are an awful lot of jurisdictions. They all were sort of separate until the metropolitan cities started growing, and the Regional Plan Association was created for the New York area, for the New York City. And they started because people were living one place and commuting across boundaries. So the notion of regional planning just sort of began in the 1920s. And so this notion that we have to cooperate, though, most people, we think it's a no-brainer. We learned it in kindergarten. Everybody knows it's the right thing, but sometimes it's very hard to do in the world. And we've got a lot of boundaries, and there are many stovepipes. People have to protect their turf. They want to maintain their identity. And we're very often given this dichotomy. It's cooperation or competition. But from my experience in seeing the world is that competition makes us better and stronger. In sports and business, it leads to better outcomes. What we do want, though, in competition is a level playing field so that we're competing with peers. So the easiest way that I have of explaining this is if your child goes to a 700-student high school, you don't want that high school to be competing against a 2,000-student high school. The odds are just against them. So what's the solution? Well, you create leagues. You try to make sure that the kids are competing against peers. And then if one team is so good, it can go up the next level. Fine. Again, competition strengthens us, but we just want it to be fair. It has to be a level playing field. And it's up to the community to make that happen. So industries create standards for interoperability. They reach a point where things have to work together. And there isn't anybody in any field who doesn't give credit to the people that went before him. Innovators say that they were only able to accomplish something because they stood on the shoulders of giants. So we have this upward curve of knowledge and information and support of hundreds and hundreds of communities working together. We may not be seeing the world correctly because everything we do and see and actually is a product of human cooperation. Everything in this room, chairs, everything, our trips here, everything we went through. If we look at the world a little differently, we can see that there's a massive amount of cooperation. But there are still boundaries. And again, the boundaries maintain identity. Now, if any of you have ever studied cooperation, it's mostly the prisoner's dilemma. There's somebody in a cell over here, and should they cooperate to, coordinate their lives so they get free or whatever. But I think the real dilemma is the neighbor's dilemma. How much do we cooperate and still maintain our identity? I don't know if there's any scholarship on this particular point, but again, I think it's really the neighbor's dilemma. How do you keep an identity and still cooperate? Well, we can do that. So you create inclusive, regional, greater communities of communities so that you don't lose your identity by participating in this other community. Well, again, that's this notion that I'm offering that community precedes cooperation. But when it comes to political boundaries, relationships are very formal. So if we take into account their situations, I think we can understand and make those political boundaries work better for us because they're very important to our personal security. So this was my region. It had 20 local governments. The youngest one was chartered in 1910. The other ones were over 350 years old now. And our chartered planning district, chartered in 70, we were the new kid on the block. And we were just cooperative. So we were a political subdivision. So I had to learn to respect all of that. So Virginia divided the whole state up into regions, but it went and asked all the localities, which region do you want to be in? And then they organized the state agencies to use these same regions. But again, and when it started, there was a fear of consolidation and that they'd all lose their identity. You know, the school boards had been consolidated all over the country, and the political scientists were after consolidation. So there was an unease about this. Okay, just to give you a little more sense of my little region here, we're 60 miles west. This is Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, New Jersey. So it's a multi-state region. And then even throughout the whole nation, there's essentially a network of multi-county regional planning organizations, which began in some cases in the 50s in the metropolitan areas. And these are emerging regional communities, but they're different in every state, and they have different funding and things like that. I use hats to express identity. So I live in the town of Front Royal and wear that hat and elect officials there. And then I vote for somebody for the county, so I have a county hat. And then I have a state hat. I get to vote for my state delegate and the senators and my representative, and then I get to vote for the president. So I have all these political identities, and the boundaries go with each one. These are the formal political subdivisions. Why are they so important? Each one has a direct vote. I pay taxes, and I get services. And the result overall is community security. All my hats, you know, I can be town, I can be county, I can be state, whatever I want to be, depending on the issue. And you're all doing the same thing. You all get that opportunity to speak to whatever issue at whatever time based on whatever identity you want to turn on. When it comes to a region, the vote is indirect because there are appointees. The taxes are indirect because you pay an assessment to the organization to keep going. Those of you who aren't amazed by Salt Lake City and everything that's here, this is all a product of very important regional cooperation that was done for the Salt Lake Valley, as the mayor explained in the session I was at yesterday. And services can either be indirect or direct. And the people who come to these boards as appointees, they already have a hat on. So is a hat going to work? Is there a regional hat? No, really, an umbrella works. It's an umbrella organization. It's its other identity. Now we get to the profit motive, because who cares about any problems? The profit motive is going to solve every problem we've ever had. I don't think so. So in 2008, is when I retired, and at the financial crisis, we'd done everything that we were supposed to do for economic development, and then the property values tanked and everything turned out to be not so good. The number of problems facing us, when I talk to people, I would say the only thing that's going to save us is community. And people agreed with that. They said, yeah, that's about the only thing, because the economists for sure don't know what they're doing. So it caused me to search for the term community motive, because I felt that there had to be, the profit motive is pretty late in civilization. Civilization's there a long time, so the community part was important. So I did find, in the sense I thought of it, from 1944 by Aldo Leopold, who was an early ecologist and conservationist. So he says, acts of conservation without the requisite desire and skills are futile. To create these desires and skills and the community motive is the task of education. So with the community motive, you do the right thing for the right reason. My mother told me it's a civic responsibility. And here's the term, and no one's using it. So part of my mission is to make community motive visible. And the very important thing about it is the most important things you do in life you don't get paid for. The things you do for family, They support the community. And that is absolutely the power of all these tiny little communities that have existed for 300 years. And that's what I saw in my region. And I also saw the service organizations like Rotary doing things that nobody else could do. So community motive is important. And the religions are the primary cultural teachers of community motive because they focus on the perpetuation of human communities and peaceful coexistence as an expression of spirituality. And then we have civil society, the we the people governments. We have to work these things together. So these are our goals. Globally, there are many boundaries to cross and work across, and there are thousands of multi-jurisdictional organizations. So the new paradigm, flipping it, is think local, plan it, act regionally. We can all we're doing it. This organization is doing it. And so I had an epiphany flying out of National Airport, and I looked down and I just saw that was all cooperation. Everything we see in this room is cooperation. So how many identities, how many hats do you have? How many hats can we wear? Okay, and so here's the varsity of Star Wars. So what's our ultimate hat is the humanity hat. So we want to think local, planet, and act regionally. So this human unity and cooperation, so where does this outrageous goal come from? Well, as I said earlier, I had learned of greater community spirituality in 1997. Those three terms summed up everything I was trying to do. And so I became a student of what's called the New Message today. They have a booth out here in the hall here. So that is it. If anybody wants the PowerPoint, if they send me an email, I'll get you a download. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You gave us some really great practical building blocks using your planning experience on how we can think about the cooperation industry. Thank you for that. We will now open up for Q&A.